Let's start in South Africa, where a local union leader has been shot dead outside Lonmin's Marikana mine. The woman was a member of the National Union of Mine Workers, which has been engaged in a relatively brutal turf war with the rival Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union. Now, Monday's killing comes as the country prepares to mark a year since 34 miners were shot dead by South African police officers. CCTV's Guy Henderson has this report on the continuing violence in Africa's biggest economy 12 months on.
Sirens off and entering the hostels at night to collect weapons and clean up ahead of Friday's anniversary.
We have a new structure that is yet to be launched by the Minister, the Mine Crime Combating Forum. This is a structure where we are starting to work together with the mine security, mine management, the labor unions themselves as well. We are working with them to ensure that we all work together towards the attainment of peace and security.
A show of force met with anger. Deep distrust still lingers. Before any confrontation, officers left as quickly as they'd come.
A year on from the shootings at Marikana, and big police raids like this continue amid a great deal of resentment. And meanwhile, the killings continue.
The latest, a female shop steward from the National Union of Mine Workers, shot dead outside her home on Monday in broad daylight. Neither family nor neighbours were willing to talk. More than 10 murder or attempted murder cases have been opened in the last 12 months here. The victims from both sides in this war. Not one has been solved. Condolences from a government minister came with tight security. This was a heartland of the ruling party, the ANC. Now its NUM ally has lost much of its support to the rival Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union.
Definitely we are not going to be having police everywhere in every street. So we have cowards, we have sick people in our society, and it's the task of all of us to stand up to those people. I'm calling on this community because the lady was killed here at around 11 during the day. So surely there are people in the community who saw those who killed the lady, and if they can come forward with the information, that will help us.
The NUM Rustenburg office says it lives in fear of what it calls an onslaught.
Our members, shop steward in particular, are getting killed on a daily basis. Right. And we have been appealing to the police to arrest people, and so that the law should take its course. So far, the trends are pointing to the same culprits.
Later this week, only AMCU will gather supporters at the hill where 34 miners were shot, their memories still scattered in the dust. Answers for their deaths, and many after, remain elusive. Guy Henderson, CCTV, Rustenburg, South Africa.
Still in South Africa, the coal mining sector is holding its breath after 3 unions there declared a dispute with coal mine owners in the country during the current round of wage negotiations. Here's CCTV's Angela Coppola with the latest details.
At face value, it appears that this is simply a union flexing its muscles and fighting for increased wages and better living conditions for its members. It's a little more complicated than that, and there appears to be a strategy behind the decision.
To basically unlock a deadlock, we decided let's declare a dispute. It's under the facilitation of the CCMA, and then the employers can make a few bold steps and put on the table what they intended.
A speedy resolution is essential because there is the potential for an economic snowball effect, something that all parties are keenly aware of.
At Eskom, there's also a deadlock in the negotiations, and if there's a deadlock, it will have an impact on energy supply in the country, and that's something we need to avoid at all costs.
Commentators are saying that the unions and the employers have taken the position that both sides are price takers when it comes to specific costs and tax.
This is the only opportunity what the employees and the employer have to negotiate on price, and that's why it's so important. But there's so much maturity involved in the coal negotiations that I believe that with the maturity and the relationships that we have, that we will find a settlement within the next 2 weeks.
The CCMA process seems fairly clear-cut, but the situation can change at any moment.
The mining sector is in a state of flux at the moment. There are wage negotiations happening in the coal sector and in the gold sector. It appears, though, that Solidarity has declared a dispute in the coal sector because it wants the matter resolved quickly, so that the three unions involved can then focus on the gold sector, which is seen as tricky. I'm Angelo Coppola for CCTV in Johannesburg.
Now let's reel in some perspectives from the United Kingdom and South Africa off the back of those two stories. CCTV's Melanie Ralph is in London, Guy Henderson is in Johannesburg. They both join us live right now. Guy, 24 hours after the killing of this NUM member, what do the police know? Has any conclusive link been established between the union rivalry and her murder?
Well, as has happened so often with this recent spate of killings over the last few months, we at this stage, and the police seem to know very little. From their initial reports, it seems as though there was one gunman that he opened fire at close range on this lady as she was returning to her family home outside the Lonmin mine in Marikana. So that suggests perhaps that this could have been a targeted killing in line with those other killings that we've seen in the past. And there's also reports that as this man was fleeing, or man or woman was fleeing, he or she fired off shots almost at random, perhaps to try and get people who may have been able to identify this individual to instead dive for cover. However, shortly after this happened on Monday, we went literally door to door to ask neighbours whether any of them had seen anything, and all of them gave the same answer: "We don't know anything, please leave us alone." So, and that's despite the fact that this is a relatively small community, and on the whole, people do tend to know each other. They seem to know each other's faces and allegiances. We've spoken to both the NUM and AMCU. The NUM seem to be suggesting that that this latest killing was in line again with this spate of recent killings that we've seen as part of this union war. AMCU, I went up to their office just outside the mine. They were courteous, but declined to be interviewed and stayed very tight-lipped.
Indeed. Melanie, coming to you in London, how concerned are investors on your end, given the continued violence that we have seen from August last year to date?
Well, Rama, it's safe to say that it can't help but weigh heavy on investor sentiment, as with all the violence and killings we've seen in this sector. The latest adds to a tragic string of events. We know that the platinum miners were already looking to enter talks over wage negotiations, but the fact remains these miners are already operating on thin margins or making losses. Gold and coal miners have already entered into wage talks. The price of coal is shooting up on the back of wage disputes and as buyers are stocking up ahead of winter. The fear is these wage disputes are just the tip of the iceberg as South Africa struggles with its fundamental divisions within society. Certainly investors would like to see a bigger and quicker response from the government over these events.
Indeed. Guy, so far, according to NUM, no one has been either arrested, convicted or charged in relation to the spate of killings we've seen over the last 12 months. Is that an accurate statement? And if it is, how is that even possible?
Well, I spoke to a senior police officer in Rustenburg about this, and he slightly deflected the question, not really directly answering it. He referred to the Farlam Commission, which is the commission of inquiry into those killings that took place almost exactly a year ago in Marikana when those 34 miners were shot dead. He said that the Farlam Commission had specifically asked that the police release people who may have been implicated in those killings in order for them to be allowed to do their work at the commission. Now that explains perhaps what they see as a lack of progress when it comes to events surrounding the shootings that took place at Marikana, but there have been these numerous apparently targeted assassinations that have taken place since. So back earlier this year, one of the founding members and a very senior member of AMCU was shot dead in a bar just down the road from this most recent killing. And then just at the end of last month, and obviously only yesterday, we had more killings of senior NUM leaders. So there does seem to be this lack of progress on the police's part. And as far as we can tell from speaking to people on the ground there, it seems as though there's this impression that if people say too much, if they perhaps give anything away or act as a willing witness to the police, that they could lose their lives.
Indeed. Melanie, you've seen the JSE over in South Africa driving deeper into record territory, resource stocks driving that rise as well. What is it that markets are finding so bullish in South Africa's mineral story, given the underlying fundamental labour problems that we're seeing in there so far?
Well, Rama, despite this awful event, it's business as usual when it comes to the JSE. Let's not forget, it's actually been the mining sector that's been keeping markets buoyed for the last few days on the back of better data from manufacturing heavyweight China. In addition to that, events outside the country are helping keeping sentiment on the right track. Troubled Europe is seeing some better data today. The well-watched economic sentiment survey, the ZEW, shows that confidence is returning to the bloc. Not to mention rising industrial production. Then we had good news from across the pond. The US reported better than expected consumer spending. So there are a number of economic releases that help lift sentiment across the board.
Indeed. Thank you very much for that. We'll have to leave it there. CCTV's Melanie Ralph in London and Guy Henderson over in South Africa as well. Some fairly interesting developments over in South Africa. Let's move on to East Africa now. Central bank data out on August the 13th indicates that remittances to East Africa's biggest economy fell by over 9% in June. Kenyans in the diaspora sent $99.81 million into the country in that month compared to $110.15 the month before. Most of that decline was directly attributable to a $9.35 million drop in remittances from North America. Now, over a cumulative 12-month window, however, remittances to Kenya were 10.89% higher at a fraction under $1.2 billion US. That is more than the entire earnings of Kenya's entire horticulture industry in all of 2012. Now, still in East Africa, Kenya's government has finalized plans to raise the country's generation capacity by over 5 gigawatts in the next 14 months. Energy Principal Secretary Joseph Njoroge says the plan will include setting up 3 gigawatts of new coal and natural gas-fired power plants, 1.6 gigawatts of new geothermal capacity, and another 600 megawatts worth of wind power plants. The East African nation will soon be concluding talks with financiers for the development of another 210 megawatts of geothermal power. At the moment, Kenya faces the twin challenges of fast rising electricity demand and the comparatively slow growth in generation capacity. The country at the moment has an installed capacity of about 1.672 gigawatts, and that includes 120 megawatts of emergency capacity, according to the country's power distributor, Kenya Power. Elsewhere in the region, Uganda has launched a 600 megawatt hydropower project right along the line, which is expected to ease its current electricity supply deficit. Uganda currently has an installed capacity of about 380 megawatts, and that frankly is nowhere near enough to meet electricity demand, which is growing at about 15% every year, as CCTV's Isabel Nakiria now explains.
In 5 years' time, the multi-billion shilling Karuma Power Dam in northern Uganda is due to be fully operational. China's Sino Hydro, which is responsible for the construction, says a full assessment has been done and insists it will be safe for use.
We will bring our advanced technology and the design standard to this country. We will build the dam and the underground powerhouse. We will assure the government and the local people the dam will be safe.
Uganda is at the moment generating about 380 megawatts of electricity from dams that are already operational and through thermal power, which is expensive for consumers. After completion, the Karuma Power Dam is expected to boost the country's power supply, adding 600 megawatts to the national grid. And Uganda's Minister for Energy, Irene Mulonyi, says any excesses of electricity can be traded to neighboring countries.
This additional 600 megawatts puts us as a country at an advantage, because once we meet our needs as a country, any excess is available for export.
Last year, Uganda commissioned a 250 megawatts Bujaveli hydropower project, but the demand for electricity has sharply increased. Statistics from the Electricity Regulatory Authority indicates the demand for power is growing by 15% annually, and the country needs to commission at least 50 megawatts every year to avoid power cuts. The Karuma Power Project will be built under a concession by China at a very low interest rate and long repayment period.
We have agreed with Sino Hydro Corporation to procure 85% of funding with a soft loan from the Exim Bank of China, and the Uganda government will provide 15%.
Power experts say Uganda will need 1,130 megawatts of electricity by 2023, and if the country is to meet this demand, the new projects to boost power supplies are an urgent necessity. Isabel Nakiria, CCTV, Karuma, Northern Uganda.
Now, on Tuesday, Nigeria's National Council on Privatization said 386 consortia have been shortlisted for the purchase of 10 major power plants in the country. The governor of the central North Benue state, Gabriel Suswam, said the sales have attracted 110 submissions from both local and international investors after recent local and international roadshows. Now, the power plants being privatized include Bariam, Benin, Motosho, Egbema, Omoku, Geregu, Calabar, Ogorode, Olaoje and Olorunshogo. Now, nearly 3 years ago, President Goodluck Jonathan pledged to privatize the bulk of Nigeria's power sector as part of wider efforts to end chronic power shortages, which are the biggest brake on economic growth in Africa's second largest economy. Time for a short break. Here's a snapshot of what's coming up next. Somalia's federal administration has signed its first oil exploration contract. We'll have all the details right here when we come back.
BizAsia. Asia means business.
Welcome back. Let's take you to the Horn of Africa, where Somalia's federal administration has signed its first oil exploration contract with the British oil company Soma Oil and Gas Exploration. Now, the firm is fronted by the former leader of the UK's Conservative Party, Michael Howard, who signed a deal in Mogadishu with Somalia's National Resources Minister. CCTV's Mohammed Hirmoge was there.
The agreement will allow Soma Oil and Gas to undertake seismic surveys for both onshore and offshore oil exploration. The move is welcome as Somalia's long period of civil war has meant that the country's oil and gas potential remains largely unexplored.
We have agreed Soma Oil and Gas does tests on the feasibility of oil prospect in this country. They will first do a seismic survey. We hope this agreement will be part of investment to explore our natural resources for economic growth.
Following the feasibility, Soma Oil and Gas Company will then prepare an evaluation of Somalia's petroleum potential before the company can apply for preferential oil blocks.
That agreement is, I hope, just the beginning, just the first step of a strong and constructive and fruitful partnership between Soma and the government of Somalia, and I very much look forward to our working together over the months and years to come.
Soma Oil and Gas, the first company to win the contract, was established earlier this year to find oil in Somalia. Oil and gas finds in neighboring East African countries has seen a surge in interest from foreign investors, with major powers competing for access to the region's resources. It is expected that oil exploration will attract further investment and expand the country's economy. The Somali government says this contract with Soma Oil, a UK-based firm, reflects on the growing strength of relations between the UK and Somalia. Mohammed Hirmoge, CCTV, Mogadishu.
Now, just before we run through the markets, let's run through an idea that's offering startup companies quite an interesting leg up in Britain: pop-up shops. Now, over the next 6 weeks, 60 British startups will set up shop in one of London's most famous streets, Piccadilly. These pop-up shops are a phenomenon born out of the growing number of empty shops on Britain's high streets after businesses were crippled by a combination of weak consumer confidence and spending as a result, and rising rents. Now, last year, quite a few retail chains went bust more than ever before. But as the number of retailers decreased, the trend of pop-ups is actually growing.
The market for pop-ups is growing massively still. There's lots of companies helping people to do pop-ups. It's kind of an experimental testing ground for retailers, effectively. That's what we're trying to provide, all at a pretty low cost and low risk way.
I think it's great for young aspiring retailers to get an opportunity to open a shop at a much lower cost. I think consumers like it because it's variety and they like to support the small independent shop, especially in current times. And then finally, it's very good for landlords because they're seen to be helping the wider market, not just the big chains.
Right, quick run through the markets now. Let's see exactly what's been going on as far as equities are concerned on the continent. Starting on the western coast with Nigeria's all-share index that ended the day lower by about 6/10. Some fairly interesting developments in South Africa despite all the chaos that we have seen in the mining sector. Resource stocks have been driving the all-share index up towards record territory, up by 3/10 over there. The 20-share index in the Kenyan capital up relatively marginally by just about 0.1 of a percentage point. However, turnover was up about 41% day on day. And of course, Egyptian market also in the green, up marginally by just about a tenth. That's business for you today. More in the next 24 hours. Right now on to Beatrice for the sport.